Hi everyone. Well, it is my favorite time of the semester. Get to take a look at everyone's service learning projects. I know this project was probably very challenging for many of you, but I think it really sets you up perfectly to move forward in this class and begin to develop your skills for the final push here for your last project, which is going to be your final portfolio. So with that in mind, let's get right into it and take a look at the work. So first of all, we have Alyssa's images, and Alyssa was working with blind children, and I think this is a really nice opening photograph. Although I have to say, Alyssa, the one thing that confused me a little bit on your project was you didn't really give us a clear sequence of images here that we should look at. I notice you've got one labeled pick one and then another one labeled therapy one, and in your artist statement you really didn't give us a full list of how you wanted us to view things. So, in the big picture that's just kind of a minor thing, but it would be helpful for us to just look at all of your images in the sequence that you wanted us to look at them in. Certainly the way the sequence that we look at things in is going to affect the way we perceive the images and the way we read the images in that. So, that is something that I do want you guys to be aware of as you think about putting your final projects together. So, beautiful picture here. I noticed you did make some refinements. You brought out some of the contrast in here, or the clarity, so that we could see each one of these little bumps from the braille in there. It certainly says something about the people that you're working with and tells us a little bit about their disabilities and some of the challenges that they have to overcome. I love the fact that you have these really wonderful diagonal lines that lead us into the project. It almost reminds me a little bit of the opening sequence in Star Wars, where we've got the words that sort of trail all the way into the film that almost invite us to come on in and look at the images. So really strong picture. Not a lot that we could do to refine this. I think really, really solid image. We talked about this image earlier, and still love this shot. I think it really is taken from a vantage point that is very different, and it allows us to experience the world in a sense, in the way that these children must have to experience it. We're kind of down by this little rubber ball, this device that they use to help guide them through their navigation. And I think we get a sense of how much that they have to rely upon that, and the world that sort of exists around that ball, and how different it is than the world that kind of exists at eye level. So again, I really like this a lot. Looks like you kind of have our colors maybe a little saturated in this area, or maybe you desaturated this area. In either case, again, I think it works really well. It brings our attention to this device, and I think also it kind of highlights the little pink jacket in the background, which also says something about that these kids, while in many ways, have to rely upon this, that they're also kids just like any other kids, with lockers and jackets and backpacks and stuff like that. So, in one way it speaks about the disabilities and the challenges that they have to overcome, but in another way it talks about how they're kids just like any other kids. So I like that a lot. Again, really successful photograph. I think you're off to a really good start here. Again, I'm not necessarily sure what order I need to be looking at these in, so I'm just going to pop them through like this. So the next two images here, again, I love the fact that you're getting down low, that you're providing us with a vantage point that is really intimate and sort of within that child's world, as opposed to, perhaps an adult's world that would be taken from sort of eye level here. It's interesting. You have two images that are almost the same here. We've got this one where she's looking down, and then this one where she's looking up. I feel like in the first one, I think your color balance is a little bit better here. I think the colors are just a little bit warmer, and the overall brightness of this image is a little bit better than this image. This image feels a little bit dark, and especially in this area, excuse me, it's really kind of falling into the shadow areas. Now we can, certainly do some techniques here. In this instance, I would just go in. I made a new adjustment layer. I didn't touch that layer at all, but what I did do is go in here, change my blending mode to screen, and then I go in under Image, Adjustments, and Invert, and that flips that adjustment layer basically back to where it is. But if you notice, it's got a black mask on the layer, which when we have a black mask, we can use a white paintbrush to essentially paint back in the details that were there in the adjustment mask. We can see in this sense here, we can bring some of that back. So here's a before, here's an after. We can maybe even change the opacity here a little bit better and fix that image up to bring out some of the details that got lost in the dark areas within here. But that being said, I think, if you had one thing here that I probably would change is that these images are so similar, I'd select one or the other. Both of them are fine photographs. I think on their own, they work great. I'm thinking when I look at the project as a whole, I personally would tend to drift more towards this image because it almost feels like the photographer isn't there. It almost feels like we're kind of looking in on this child in a very private moment. And I think from that perspective, it really works with the rest of the other images in the body of work. Now, I gotta say, I love this image too. She's got this wonderful facial expression there. She's smiling, she's looking up into the camera. And I even love how sort of like her one foot is up in the air there. So it's really a solid image. I think just, more of an aesthetic decision here on my part. And I think looking at the whole project as a whole, it isn't filled with kids looking up into the camera. So I think from a point of cohesiveness, this one probably works better for me than this one. So then moving on here, and see how in this image the child isn't looking at the camera. Again, in this one, the child isn't looking at the camera, and again, obviously there's not a face in there, but again, the child's not looking at the camera. So I just would apt on that previous shot to go with the one where she's not looking at the camera. So another interesting image. We've got sort of a frame that's divided into two sides, and in a really neat way, it creates almost this wonderful balance here between the hands on one side and the writing on the other side. And this is almost sort of like the fulcrum in the image that sort of provides that balance between the two. Again, really beautiful shot. And I really love the fact that you've got some lighting here that again brings emphasis not only to the braille in the book, but also I love sort of the bends in the paper and some of the wear and tear that certainly must be part of what happens when a child is constantly running their hands across the piece of paper. So I think that works really well. And I also just love the little hands here, and I think we get a sense of a proportion here and just the age of this little kid and again some of the obstacles that they really have to overcome as they're working through here. Another neat shot, again, a lot of these images are focused in on the hands, and I think that again does say a lot about these children, how they're sort of experiencing the world through their hands. So again, I think it works really well, and I like how you set up your frames. You're not putting things in the middle of the shot. You're working the edges of the images, and again, this really sets this up because we've got a lot of empty or negative space here that really plays off of the really busy area right here. So it becomes a very active frame because you've got stuff going on here and it's juxtaposed against an area that really has nothing going on in it. So again, I think it works really well. Maybe the one refinement I do here is this hand feels like it's kind of randomly floating in the background. I realize that this is probably a teacher or someone else helping here, but I think in this instance it kind of interrupts this beautiful shape of what's going on here. So again, pretty minor thing, but as we're trying to make the best image possible, we want to refine it as much as we can. And then again, another image that we saw previously. I guess I've said it before, and I'll probably say it a bunch of times again throughout the semester. I like the idea of desaturating the color here. I'm not necessarily sure I would desaturate it all the way so that it's completely black and white. Again, it's a personal choice, but I think if you look at bodies of work that we see in galleries and major exhibitions of photography, generally speaking, we don't see this technique because I think it's largely seen as something that tends to be kind of gimmicky. And if you're really looking to draw the viewer's attention to a certain area of a photograph, I think there's other ways to do it, and other ways that might seem a little bit more naturalistic, such as using composition, which I think in this case, we've got a nice line here. We've got a psychological line of his eyes looking at that. We've even got the finger pointing to this. So I think it's almost unnecessary to desaturate that as you did here. But again, in the grand scheme of things, I don't think that's a real major big deal, but I think it did break up the cohesiveness of your project just a teeny bit. And again, then the last and final image, again showing sort of the textural elements that these students experience the world through. And I think, kind of getting down really close and taking this from a perspective or vantage point that is different than what we would normally see it, you allow us to experience it in a very tactile manner. And so not only do we see it, but we actually sort of visually see it in a way that we're feeling it also. So I think that's really great. So Alyssa, awesome project. I think you did a really, really wonderful job with these images. They were very well seen. I think you reveal a narrative and a point of view that is very definitive. And again, just overall, really, really good job with the whole project. Again, some of the things that we pointed out here, they are refinements that you can make, but not major ones, and certainly ones that I don't think distract away from the real beauty of this whole body of work. So great job here, and certainly look forward to seeing the images that you make for your final project as we wrap up the semester. So keep up the hard work, and we'll see you in the next video. So next up we have Brittany's images. And before we get started looking at her images, I'd just like to look at her artist statement for a minute here. I really love your artist statement, and I love the fact that you've also given us the titles of your images, and I'm assuming that this is the ordering or the sequence that you want us to look at them in. I think maybe just one refinement I would do in your artist statement here. I think I'd get rid of this first uh, sentence, because the first sentence is really obvious. I mean, the viewer kind of knows that this is what we're looking at. But from there, I think if you started your artist statement right here, so the ambiance of the studio welcomes the mentally disabled and allows them to communicate among one another through dance. I think that's beautiful. I think that's a great starting uh, sentence for your artist statement. So great job with this. Really like this, and I especially love this kind of concluding sentence. These photos evoke happiness, and they are what represent danceability. So you sort of talk a little bit about the project. You sort of give us a little tease of what we're going to see, and then you sort of express how these images make you feel when you look at them. So nice job with the artist statement. Really like that a lot. Let me just move this off the screen here. So first image is 8848 that we're going to look at. And I mean, gosh, what a great shot. You feel that happiness, the joy that not only the participants are having in it, but also the volunteers. And you can see the real authentic, genuine connection between these two people. And I think, sort of the key to great photography like this is kind of sitting back and just becoming a really good observer of what's happening in any given scenario. So, you have to kind of sit back and watch moments like this develop and observe the relationships between two people, and certainly wait for that moment that we use the terminology decisive moment to happen. And certainly this wonderful laugh where her head is tilted back is a perfect example of that decisive moment that we talk about. So just love this image. I think it's a great starting point of your project, and not a lot I can say to refine this image. So great job with your starting image here. Really love it. This is your next one, and again, I just really love how not only you capture the faces of the people that are the participants, but also the volunteers or the teachers that are there. You can see what a great time that they're having also. I love the composition of this image, where you've got sort of one person in the foreground here with their back towards you, one person in the background here, and it's almost like they're enclosing this person in the middle, and in some way it's almost like they're metaphorically holding them or supporting them, which I think again says a lot about what this place does and what the people that volunteer there do. So again, I just can't say enough about this image. It just makes me smile when I look at it, and I think when we talk about great imagery, I think that is what excellent images or successful images do. They bring about an emotional response, and if you could see the big smile on my face, you'd see that this image certainly brings about that big emotional response. So again, pat on the back for that one. And then here, again, your composition is fantastic. You're working sort of the corners and the edges of the frame. You're not putting everything in the middle of the photograph here. I love this repetition of pattern here of all the different balls that sort of just lead our eye right up to this young lady that is in the foreground of the photograph. So again, really, really big kudos on this shot. I even love the fact that their shirts are kind of up here, and their stomachs are kind of hanging out a little bit. It talks to the fact that as human beings we're not all perfect, that we all sort of have these little differences, yet within these differences, I think we can appreciate the human form and human beings and the connections that we have to each other. So I think this image just really expresses that in a beautiful kind of way. So great job. I know I'm saying great a lot, so that's a good thing though. So good job. And then we're 9038. Sorry, went out of order here. You know, again, you're using sort of that same formula, the repetition of patterns with the rings here or the hula hoops that we've got. And I love the complexity of this image. Sort of, it has just tons and tons of depth where we're visually being drawn into this photograph in a very, very deep way. So not only do we have this stuff in the foreground, we've got stuff in the middle ground and stuff in the background. And by using the mirror here also, you're kind of almost adding an extra layer of depth to the photograph that gives it a certain complexity that is very interesting and appealing to me. So again, really like this a lot. Then 274, and probably one of my favorite images of the group. Beautiful lighting on his face here. You notice the lighting is coming from the side and from above, which is creating texture here. And with texture, we again get three-dimensionality, so depth in our image here. You know, we can see sort of the texture in his face, and even his arms and his shirt, all the wrinkles in the shirt, which wrinkles in a good way. We all see that, and I think that makes the image jump off of the page for us and really almost kind of sits in our lap here as we watch the image. And I also love, you know, again, the expression not only on his face where we can see the joy and happiness he is having within this, but also sort of in this guy's face where you can see he's really intense and getting into it. So love it a lot. I think I mentioned in an earlier critique of this image that I could probably live without having this random arm coming into the shot here, but you know, I also recognize that it's you know, a room, probably a small room where, you know, people are compressed in there, and I don't want you to be overly interruptive of what's going on. So, you know, telling this person to move or something like that, I think might you know, ruin the spontaneity of the event. So, you know, I can live with that. I'm you know, not super critical of that. So, you know, it'd be ideal if you could move it out of there, but we can live with it. And then 38 we're looking at next. And again, you know, just love the fact that we've got this interaction between the two people, and we've got this great line that sort of points into the mirror, and then that line sort of points back to them. So there's sort of this nice almost figure eight composition that's going on that, you know, sort of keeps our eye going back and forth and back and forth in this pattern. That keeps us really engaged in the image. And I may have said it before, but I'll say it again. When we have writing in a photograph, our eye also is really attracted to that writing. And in this instance, our eye goes to this, and, you know, it asks us the question, are you mighty? And then we look at this little girl who clearly is very much into what she's doing here. And even her posture, and I love even how her leg is slightly lifted like that. You know, it feels like she's experiencing that feeling of like, are you mighty? You know, she's becoming strong through dance. So again, this image just really works very well. And then 57, yep, we got the right one. Again, great composition. I love how you're using the edges and the sides of the frame. Everything doesn't have to be perfectly centered. Some nice negative empty space here, which I think again allows us just to focus in on these two people right here. The one thing that I kind of feel like this body is sort of random in the background, and in a perfect world probably would like to have that edited out. But again, I understand that you're shooting this thing in a pretty crowded active room, and we're going to have sort of stuff like this getting into the edge of the photo. My eye is going here and then it's going here, so in a sense, it's not really being attracted to this too much, and especially because it's also dark. So it's got a black and gray sweats on here. My eye is really going to go to the thing that's got a lot of saturated color in it. So my eye really works through these two spots here. So again, great job. And then last but not least, I like the fact that we kind of wrap up things with sort of an overview or a concluding shot of everyone together. And there's one little detail here that I think is great. I love this girl or this woman looking back at her, but it's almost like she's looking back at the viewer also. So she's kind of connecting with us as we're looking at this image, and sort of drawing us in or inviting us to be a part of this big circle of people here. So awesome project. I really like what you did. Everything works really well with each other. I think you've set up a sequence of images that works incredibly well. And you can see how your presence in this room is really not interruptive, that you're not being heavy-handed with the camera. It's almost like you're quietly observing these people. And that is evidence of the fact that you got involved here and these people were very comfortable with your presence. And again, that's one of the reasons we ask you to put some time in these service learning sites and become familiar with the people, so that when you do go to take photographs of them, that your presence isn't something that interrupts what's going on. So super job. Again, another home run on this project. So keep up the good work as you're pushing towards your final portfolio, and look forward to seeing what you've got for us the rest of the semester. So good job, Brittany.